A direct war between Israel and Iran? That's terrifying. And a lot of people have said recently, and I'm one of them, that such a war is likely to be a world war because we have these alliances, it seems, but tell me if I'm wrong about this. It seems to me over the last several years that two alliances have been formed in the Middle East, essentially. One led by the United States, and that's with Saudi Arabia and Israel, of course, an alliance there. And on the other side is Iran, Russia, and Syria. Does that make sense to talk about it that way? That there are two emerging alliances, which to me looks more and more like the beginning of World War One.
I think you're quite correct. It is very worrisome. Those alliances have already been there informally for some time. Formalizing it further, in my view, really does increase the likelihood of war because there's no clear balance between these two pacts. I mean, without the US's military finger on the scale will tilt very differently if you look at these alliances. So the Israeli, Emirati, Saudi side absolutely require the US to be part of this. And from the Quincy administration Institute's perspective, we're very much looking at what's in the US interest. And if there are manipulations and efforts to constantly drag us back into the region, which is to our detriment, then we find that highly problematic. And it's also detrimental to the region as a whole, because we believe that if we are not a belligerent in so many of these different conflicts, which we unfortunately are, we're a belligerent in Yemen right now. We could instead be using our diplomatic influence to be able to help lead efforts to mediate, resolve some of these conflicts. But once we are the arms salesman, the political protector of one party or more in a conflict, then we have essentially disqualified ourselves from actually being able to play a constructive diplomatic role. And in our view, stability in the region is conducive to US interests precisely because it reduces the likelihood of conflicts that could potentially drag the US into it. We have the ability to play that role. We're not, because we have instead chosen to make ourselves belligerents in these conflicts. Again, going back to what I said earlier on, because we've defined our interests as such, we have to stand with allies. We have to help allies, which means that instead of being able to be a peacemaker, we are now party to various conflicts. By the way, we have a report coming out that I think you will find quite interesting. Matt Pett is the lead author on this report, took a look at all of the different interventions in the region for the last 10 years, just to see, is it really so, this Washington narrative that there's like one country in the region that is responsible for the instability in the region? It used to be Gaddafi, it was Iran, then it was Saddam Hussein, then it's back to Iran. This is a very common theme in Washington, which we reduce the complexity of the region to like this one bad actor. Well, if the data would be correct, then Iran for the last 10 years would be like an outlier in terms of interventions that it's done in the region. Instead, we're seeing that there's 6 countries: Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, Turkey. Let me count again. Saudi Arabia, Iran, UAE, Israel, Qatar, and Turkey, who all have played a roughly equal role in terms of interventions. There's essentially 2 intervals. There's a top tier of Iran, Turkey, and the UAE that have been the most interventionist. Iran's interventionism has been pretty stable. Turkey and UAE have actually surpassed Iran in terms of military interventions in the affairs of other states. You have a lower tier with Qatar and Saudi Arabia, but they are the financiers of UAEs and Turkey. What's fascinating with all of this is that they're all, contributing to instability and interventions. The report is called No Clean Hands, because that is truly what the situation is there. But here's the potential flip side. Or first, there's a bad thing with it, but there's a flip side to that bad thing. 5 out of the 6 most interventionist, and by that, in our view, destabilizing actors in the region, are armed and politically supported by the United States.
Right.
But that also means that 5 out of the 6, we actually have a lot of leverage. A lot of these instabilities in the region are actually because US allies are fighting each other. Take a look at Libya, for instance. You have the Turks and the Emiratis on 2 different sides. Well, the United States actually has leverage with these countries because of its strong relations with them, and could use its relationship with them to help resolve those conflicts. We're not, though, because we're so focused on Iran. And again, this obsession with Iran. So we're turning a complete blind eye so that we have completely destroyed Libya, and it's continuously being destroyed with the warfare that is taking place there, most of it driven by partners of the United States. And instead, we're just focusing on Iran. This is not to give the Iranians a free pass. On the contrary, it's very clear from the data. It's one of the most interventionist countries in the region. And it's been so steadily, whereas some of the others are more newcomers to this game. But it means that the lion's share is actually taking place outside of things that Iran is involved in. And we have an ability to address those issues and resolve it, but we're not, because we're just focusing on what the Iranians are doing. So there's a lot of low-hanging fruit in which the United States actually could be very helpful to bring about stability, but we're not doing that. And I think that's a shame, particularly if we want to make the claim that stability in the region is in our interest, and that's what is guiding our foreign policy. Well, if that's the case, there's a lot we can do.
Right.